Welcome to Dedicated. I'm your host, Doug Brunt. Today we're with Lili Anolik. Lili is a best-selling author, a contributing editor for Vanity Fair, and writer-at-large for Graydon Carter's media company, Airmail. Her latest book is the dual biography, DIDION Babitz. It is a terrific book. It's getting rave reviews. Every time I go online or on Instagram, I'm seeing some new amazing review.
It's my husband bragging. It's just
he's impersonating all these things like the New York Times, I guess.
No, he's not that slick, but he's putting the information out there.
Tell me what he charges. I'd like to hire him too. It's all looking great. The book gives you not only an up-close look at Joan Didion and Eve Babitz, two terrific writers, but it also helps us get a grasp of this era and movement that began in the 1960s literary scene. And the book is full of these incredible, salacious, fun stories about names that are now household names. They're incredible stories about Jim Morrison and Jackson Browne. We get to know a little bit about Harrison Ford before his Star Wars fame when he was basically a pot dealer for what seems to be about half of L.A. And there are stories about Steve Martin and Linda Ronstadt and their awkward romance scenes, and that's just scratching the surface. It's an amazing, smart, fun book, and the writing is terrific in it. So, Lili, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
So nice of you to say nice things.
Oh, I devoured the book. I remember, lying in bed, going to sleep, telling my wife, like, you wouldn't believe this. And the drink today is equally, well, maybe not equally, but it's an awesome drink choice, the gimlet, which is, I think, a show first.
Is that right?
I have not yet made a gimlet, I don't think.
Oh, this is I got it. It's like it's an LA drink. It's like in Chandler's The Long Goodbye.
Okay. That's
there
right.
You
mentioned that on email, yes.
Yeah.
All right, the gimlet. So gin, which we will just slosh right in there. Now, how are you on the simple syrup? A little?
No, actually.
Zero?
No,
okay.
No, more.
Good.
I like it.
More, okay,
yeah,
good.
Sorry.
All right, let's get some simple syrup
Sweet
in there.
Sweet tooth,
Sweeten it up a bit, and then some lime on that. And we will be
This is very skillfully done.
Well,
real limes. This is really impressive.
Top notch. I did this the other day, and I got so limey. It was like my hands were...
It's okay. It's a good smell.
It is a good smell. It's a little sticky for the rest of the...
Well, you'll just have to be tortured. Right?
All right, we're going to really crank the lime in there. I actually did make it was a mezcal margarita with Neil Stevenson. And he's like, you got to get the juicer in here. He's like, you got everything else. You got the whole cocktail set except the juicer.
Yeah, he wanted you whole hog. That's what he was after.
All right, mix that up. Oh, spill a little. And off we go. It's got a little lime color in there.
This looks great. This is very impressive.
And the topper of the lime wheel garnish. I'll let you grab your own.
All right, this looks great.
So I don't...
I have no fear of germs. So.
Okay. That's what Neil said. He's like, just load it. He's like, I've already had everything. Do whatever you need to do.
Yeah, well, I came here on the subway, so I'm sure I'm germed up.
Yeah.
Oh, cheers yourself. That's great.
Oh,
pretty good, right?
Yeah, I love the choice. That's great. It's a perfect drink for an unseasonably warm November day.
A fake summer day.
Yeah. So I looked around online for some bio information on you. I did not discover. I did find one article that nailed you as a Princeton alum. But that's about the main early life I could find. So where did you grow up?
Boston. Outside Wellesley.
Okay.
And I did go to Princeton, so that is true.
You've been outed as a tiger.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So, that's where I met the guy who does my social media.
Ah.
Robbie,
you guys were college sweethearts?
Yes, we were.
That's great.
Yeah. Just I stick it out.
I love that. I have one buddy who met his wife at Bucknell, and they're remain happily married after all these years. But
still together.
So few of those these days.
I know. Now I think about my kids like it seems like everybody's gross and depraved. I'm like, just pick someone in high school and get gross and depraved together, and you'll know their whole history.
I wish I had him in here. Is he shocked to learn that you have become a writer, or did he always? If I asked him, would he say, "I saw it coming"?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
No, I bored him with that, right from the start.
And was he a believer? I mean, it's so hard to actually get a book published and to make it, but would he say, yes, I knew she would have this kind of success?
I don't know. He's like nice and loyal, so he probably would. But it was like dark. I was I couldn't get anything going. It took me a really long time. So.
Well, it's cooking right now.
It's going okay right now, but
if you look back, is there a place, whether it's Princeton or before or after, that you would credit with having? Because you're writing in this book is really, I mean, I said it in the opening, but you're writing that stylistically, the prose is really, really great.
Oh, Doug, that's
is there
so
a place that you would credit with having honed your skills?
No, I mean, I'm like an embarrassingly hard worker, So I feel like all my 20s, I was like putting in so much time. I just wasn't getting anywhere, but I was probably getting just a little bit better just because I worked hard. But I can't sleep. I'm a terrible sleeper, so I always read a lot. Ever since I was little,
That is the one key. There's so few things of people that come on this show where it lines up. Everyone says the same thing. It's like the few things are pretty much everyone drinks a lot of coffee.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the other is pretty much everyone reads a ton.
Yes,
that's
it.
Those are the two things. Well, and maybe pretty much everyone tries to write as often, if not every day, pretty close to it.
Yeah.
They try to, whether it's a letter or a diary or a book.
Do people still do letters?
It's amazing. So we'll get into this with your book.
Yeah.
I know that's a key source of information for you, going back to these 1960s brilliant letters. And there was this great line in the book that you had. You were quoting someone, I can't remember, but it was something along the lines of, a writer's personal letters are sometimes superior to the rest of their work.
I'm quoting I'm quoting Proust. It was Proust.
Okay.
It was Proust.
Yeah.
But it's true. And it's like on Eve, if Joan's like a craftsperson, Eve's like improvisatory, like that was those were their modes. And I think when Eve's writing is best, it's like letter writing, it's short pieces, it's short bursts. She was really good. I mean, maybe it comes from just being such a charming person, and maybe she needed the, letters are informal, sort of like there's no pressure. Like you're not trying to write great prose, deathless prose, but somehow those were really stimulating for her. So her letters are just great. And the thing about finding people's letters now, like handwriting is so personal and so primal, like you really, just the way you form letters, it's like revealing.
That's interesting you say that, because really both of those things are eliminated. Organizing your thoughts into a 200-word letter, that doesn't happen. It's really, we're counting characters at this point in text or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's with our thumbs. We're not even using our other fingers. It's like just the thumbs to get a few characters out. You don't organize your thoughts in a way.
No.
And then, of course, there's no record of it either. It's just like into the ether. And now, I was doing research on a book, and this archivist was talking about the period I was looking at, which is sort of late 1800s, early 1900s.
Jesus, yeah.
And they're like, I forget the exact dates, but basically something from roughly 1840 to 1960 is the golden age of letter writing for research. There's just so much good stuff there, and we don't really do that anymore.
No, and it's like a funny thing, because just like everybody was kind of training as a writer, just because everybody had to do that, because unless you were loaded, you're not going to make long distance calls. Do you know? It was really a necessity. No, they're great. They're great. Yeah. Actually, when I was doing, I did a long podcast on the writers of Bennington College, class of '86, and there's still tons of letters. Like I just think it was up until email. I think you can really still get them up until email comes in. Yeah, that screws everything up.
Well, I want to get into your research on the book in a little bit. I don't want to get too far ahead on that, but I will say one last thing on your writing style and the writing of the book, because I made a note to myself, and this lands in a funny story of you and me just a week or so ago. I was reading the advance copy, which I have, and I was loving it, and I made a note in a book, so I knew we were going to have this interview.
Yeah.
And I made a note in the book, reminds me of Jeff Dyer. Note to ask Lili if she's ever read Jeff Dyer, because one of the things you do very well in the book is you have such command of the material and where you're going with the story and the propulsiveness of the story that you're able to sort of suspend it and riff for a few sentences on a broader cultural thing.
I love him.
And Dyer does that well. He's writing a book about jazz or about Roger Federer, and then suddenly the next paragraph you're reading about something bigger and broader, but it's worked into the thrust of what he's doing. Anyway, I thought you were able to sort of tap into broader cultural things, all in the context of telling the story about Didion and Eve Babitz. That's so funny, because a book of his that's like a touchstone for me is that book on D.H. Lawrence. I haven't read that one, but I know what you mean.
It's heaven, and it's about Lawrence, but it's about everything. You know, that's how he does it. He is loose that way. And I never mention him. Like, I always tend to the people I mention as touchstones tend to be girls, you know, because I don't know why. That's just how Pauline Kael or Janet Malcolm. But I loved that book, and it was influential for me. So that was a sharp observation, and he was very good, and he was at the party.
Well, that was so funny. So a couple weeks after I read your advance copy, the hardcovers are now out, and you have a book party. And I've already sort of written this note in my notebook for our interview prep, and then I look up at your book party, and there's Jeff Dyer. I'm like, oh, my God. So maybe she does know him and has read him. No,
but it was a funny coincidence. I've only met him once before, but he was in town, and I think he's like an Eve person. I wouldn't have. I actually would think she was too femme or too.
Did he know her, or he just was a fan of her writing?
He was a fan. So I've heard from him a couple of times, but we'd only met once before. But then that week of the party, we saw each other a lot. We met for breakfast with his wife, and then I went to a dinner party on a Friday night, and he was with Emma Cline again. That's who he came to the party with. She wrote The Girls.
I don't know her, but
she wrote The Guest. I'm trying to think of what else she wrote. She's a kind of a well-known kind of young novelist. Anyway.
Long dark hair. I think I must have met her because when I was talking with Jeff.
That was Sloane Krausley.
Oh, okay.
She's fair-haired.
Okay.
But he was with all the younger women.
As you do when you're Jeff Dyer.
Right.
Delete that, Jeff. Sorry.
Exactly. Want to get him in trouble with his wife, but that, yes.
Yes, you mentioned he was at dinner with his wife. Now, Jeff's a great guy and a great tennis player and just a talented. He actually is a great. We're going to get off Jeff Dyer in a second here, but I met him at a writers' festival where he was giving a presentation for this really funny, comedic, satirical book on. It was basically a review of Where Eagles Dare.
Do you want to know that's why he's an Eve person? That was Eve's longtime squeeze, the guy who directed that, Brian Hutton.
Oh, okay. And his book is called Broadsword Calling Danny Boy, which is a line from the movie.
Yes.
And he would do this presentation with mixed media. Had a whole video thing.
I bet it was insane.
It was hilarious and really well done. He had, the whole thing had to be sort of timed out the way he delivered his punchlines, and it was totally awesome. So Brian
Hutton, though, that was like her key. It was like the guy she met on her 18th birthday, and it was like a key. It was like her first real love affair.
Okay. Well, we'll get into this on Eve in the book because she knew everyone and had gotten drunk or done drugs or had sex with everyone. It was insane, her life. I'm just so
much
staying
energy.
on your writing though, just for a moment longer, and then I want to get into your process too. But you've written a number of smaller pieces for whether it's Vanity Fair.
Yes.
You've written a novel. This
shame.
is your second nonfiction book, because the first was Hollywood's Eve.
Yes.
Which Jay McInerney was on the show a few weeks ago, and he credits you with, Eve Babitz. People don't know the name as well today, but was very popular in her time in the 60s and 70s.
She wasn't. She
had some bestsellers at least,
no,
right? Nothing was a bestseller?
That. No, it was weird.
More of a culty following.
Yeah, she just didn't pop. Like, she's popped now. It's like a wild thing.
Now, okay, so that's what Jay was saying, that you basically have maybe not resurrected, but created her second act, which was bigger than the first in a way.
Well, it's like luck and timing, I mean, I always felt that, like, because her life was so wild, I feel like she's kind of a cultural heroine as much as a literary. People like her style. They like all the boyfriends and girlfriends. They like all the drugs. But I feel like that's really what kind of got her. Like, that's why Kendall Jenner is reading her on a yacht. I don't really believe it's because of her prose. Then maybe I'm selling Kendall short.
Yeah, I mean, she did flip the paradigm in some things. There was one quote in here about whether some guy had taken advantage of her, and had sex with her, and she's like, oh, she sort of viewed it more as like she took advantage. I used him for sex or something. Like, it was just.
I was trying to ask her the Me Too question.
Woman.
Yeah, no, it was great. She was so much fun. But I remember it was like 2016 or 17 when Me Too was at its height, and I was like, "Did you ever felt taken advantage of by a guy?" And she's like, "How could I? I took advantage of him first, always."
So was this more fun than writing the other pieces? I mean, you've done a variety of writing. Do you have to think about it very differently?
I just kind of knew. I mean, it takes me so long to get into a subject. I seem to need 3 tries. So I'd done an extended piece on Eve for Vanity Fair. Then I'd written a book on Eve, and I feel like I didn't get it right until now. Mm-hmm. It just, you have to get in so deep to understand. It's a kind of a big and important scene with complicated people and secretive people, really opaque people. So it's like you really have to get up in there, and that takes so much time. Mm-hmm. So it was not particularly fun to write this. I mean, I loved writing it, but it was not fun. I was really trying.
It was work.
Yeah, it was work. I was really trying to do it right,
Yeah. I remember, this is a totally different kind of book, but I remember Lee Child was on. He's like, people just think, these books just appear every September. I just go back to some room and I start cranking the wheel and out comes the book. It's like, it's hard. It's really hard.
That's right. I'd love it if it were that way, though. It would be great if it was that wheel thing.
And here's my book again. Happy September. You managed to get so much juicy stuff out of so many different people. I was reading through the acknowledgments and I thought, holy crap. I didn't see Harrison Ford in there, but I saw about
Harrison,
everyone else. So you've done so much primary research and you were so successful at getting people to spill the tea. How did you do that?
It's like, first of all, one of the advantages of being female and then working on this for so long, like you just kind of have a girl's voice, you do not have a girl's voice, but it's like you're just kind of gabbing on the phone. But I always have a recorder going, like these people are my subjects.
But I wouldn't know where to begin. Like Steve Martin was in the acknowledgments. How did you get a hold of Steve Martin and get him to do all this?
That was so long. That was so long ago. That was when I was first doing Vanity Fair helped a lot. Like, when you have kind of that institutional backing that can really help. Yeah. But people like Noel Parmentel, who was kind of a key lover for Joan in the 50s, a key lover and mentor. Mm-hmm. It was just talking and talking and talking and talking because a lot of people are private, Mm-hmm. But then I always think, like, if you're doing a documentary, that must be so tricky because it requires all this setup and there's a camera in people's faces and they're not going to let their guard down. But
would you put a recorder or would you say, I am recording?
Yeah, like that kind of thing.
And then did you have to establish the ground rules of on background, on the record, off the record?
I never said that. I just said I'm recording. Like, if people wanted...
Assumed on the record.
Assumed on the record. If people want it off the record, they kind of have to say.
Yeah. If you say I'm recording and I'm using this for the book, you're in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's that. And it's funny because I do this a lot. The other kind of thing I spent a lot of time on was Bennington College, class of 86, which was Bret Easton Ellis, Jonathan Lethem, and Donna Tartt. Mm-hmm. And I know Bret very well socially. And he knows I actually don't drink. So you're going to see me get very drunk here. I don't drink.
We'll be I never drink. To that.
Exactly. You'll be wheeling me into a cab after this. I actually feel it really strongly. But he drinks and I don't drink, and he knows I'm going to remember everything, right? Uh-huh. So it's a funny dynamic, like when people are your subjects, but the lines blur because it's social as well. You could get involved in people's lives, and they get involved in yours.
Yeah. So Donna Tartt, she's in that. I forgot she was in that. She's talented. She seems to publish like once every 10 years.
Every 10 years.
And she's really private. Uh-huh. Yeah, I'd love to have her on the show, but I think there's zero chance of her coming on. Even if I make her favorite drink, I don't know if she'd do it.
That actually, she does I think she has like a sophisticated palate for drinks, so you might get her on that.
Pass on the good word.
No, she's very mad at me, but I get Jay to pass on the good word.
Okay, I'll do that. How about just sticking with process for a bit and just some of the nitty-gritty questions? Are you writing day, night, or basically 24/7 whenever you can?
So I get up very, very, very early. You have our kids are not dissimilar in ages. So mine are 10 and 11. And I got into the habit once I had them to get up really early because you're fresh in the morning. Even if it's really early morning, you're fresh. So I do a lot then. And I work throughout the day. Like I put in the hours, but I'm probably by far the most effective early.
Yeah. I totally agree. Maybe it's a parent thing, but you get up and then there's some urgency. You're like, something's coming in 5 hours or less. And so here's my time. And it helps you focus a little bit more. And I agree. I'm a little bit more clear in the morning.
Right? You're just sharper. Like they kick the shit out of you kids.
Totally. And then so the afternoon's good for research or editing a little, something a little less brain power oriented,
Totally. Interviewing, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I feel like writing is like pure concentration. So like the morning is great.
Yeah. And really in my case anyway, I can't really hold that level of concentration where I want to be for more than 2-3 hours.
I agree.
I'm kind of tapped out.
I completely agree. Yeah. And it's all like a bribe system for me. Mm-hmm. Like you can get a Coke or whatever if you finish this paragraph. Like that kind of thing.
Self-bribing.
Yeah, self-bribing.
Okay,
yes. Like I'm both the mouse. I'm a gerbil or something. Yeah, I need
that piece of cheese at the end of the page 2.
I'm all about that cheese. Yes.
Nice. And how did you organize your research? 'Cause you must have had hours and hours of recordings of primary research.
I did.
And other things. Letters. Boxes of letters of Eve's.
It's all true. I just wasn't that systematic about it. I sort of proceeded on instinct. I really didn't mean to write this book. I was under contract with Scribner to write a different book, and I really didn't want to go back. I'd already done a book on Eve. she had absorbed me for so long, you know, because these really take it out of you. You know, you've done nonfiction, and you really are kind of hijacked by these people, right? You know, and so I wanted it to be over. You know, I wanted to move on, but she lived in these kind of really frightening circumstances. I mean, it was chaos and filth kind of beyond your wildest imaginings. You just can't believe what that apartment was like.
So this would have been how many years ago? Where this is the old version of Eve, who was sort of in her prime in the 60s and 70s, and her chaos and filth apartment.
That was great. That was I think she was like messy, but like normal messy. When I'm encountering her in 2012, it's like she's in the throes of Huntington's disease, and her brain is just crumbling, and she lives in frightening filth, and she stinks. You know, like it's awful. It's awful, awful, awful.
Living on her own.
Living on her own. And I did not think anything could survive that apartment. It was really bad. I just didn't think, the idea that she would have saved letters was ludicrous. You know, it wouldn't have happened. But in the last year of her life, she has this lovely sister, Mirandy. Mirandy got her into assisted living finally. You know, finally Eve consented to this. And she was selling Eve's condo, you know, to pay for it. And she found at the back of one of the closets these boxes that their mother had packed decades before, and they were like the duct tape was untouched. And Mirandy went into these boxes, and it was letters and journals and manuscripts and photographs and all this stuff. It was like a treasure trove. But I never expected to have to go back to this subject. And then right after Evie died, and she died Christmas 2021, and I went out for the memorial in 2022, January. And the next day, Mirandy wanted me to look into in the boxes, and I did. And the first thing I pulled out was this letter to Joan Didion, and it was like this electric document. And I knew
these two were friends and rivals.
Yes,
yeah,
that's exactly right. They were on the same scene in kind of post-Manson LA, you know, like, or pre-Manson LA and post-Manson LA, like the late 60s to the early 70s. And it's the one that Harrison Ford was on, and Ahmet Ertegun and Michelle Phillips and all these kind of artists and rock and rollers and writers and kind of flamboyant lowlifes, you know, drug dealers, right? They were on this kind of great scene, and then Joan had got Eve published, you know, in she got a piece Eve wrote on the Girls of Hollywood High into Rolling Stone. But at any rate, this letter was like a temper tantrum. She was really angry with Joan, and all of a sudden, you know, these letters, they're like they bring you back because they're kind of like living, breathing pieces of paper. You know, it's like people in the throes of the present, you know, writing each other, and they're in fights or whatever they're in. But they put you in like 1972 in a way that memory kind of can't. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden I was kind of plunged
so authentic.
into this.
I mean, it's like
Yes.
it's a piece, a time capsule type thing that you can kind of enter the portal in there.
That's exactly right. In a way that like Eve's memory, I mean, Eve looks like she's really open and candid, but style was really important to Eve, even when her brain was crumbling from Huntington's at the end. And she wouldn't bitch and moan, you know, she wouldn't complain. So she often wouldn't tell you what she went through or difficulties because that was like against her style. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But these letters, which were letters she never sent.
That was so interesting to me, by the way,
I
because
know, so
I was
interesting.
reading it, and you know, detailed, thoughtful letters that they could be accusing. They were sort of working something out, and then but they were, you know, had all the range of things were in these letters. And then I'm thinking, how did Lili get a letter from Eve Babitz written to Joan out of a box in Eve Babitz's house? Like, what was it even doing there? And then you kind of reveal, maybe you did it up front, but to me, it was revealed kind of later.
Middle of the book.
That these were unsent letters.
Yes.
And it was the whole concept of the power of the unsent letter.
Yes.
You know, what is that all about? It's even more powerful than the sent letter in a way. It's just crazy.
It is, because think about it. It's not like a discarded letter, like a letter you ball up because it's dumb or you think it's lame or embarrassing. It's a letter you think is so good. You cannot trust the recipient with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it formed this kind of diary. Like, it was more revealing even than a normal letter would be, which would be plenty revealing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also just like, you know, like time dulls feeling, right? Like, you know, like there was a fight I'm sure you got in with a close friend in 1986 or whatever, but you're not going to remember it with the same kind of urgency in 2024, you know? But if I got a letter that you'd written in 1986 to this friend, it's going to be raw.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, it's that.
Brings it right back. There are I wrote down a bunch of things that. One last question on process in terms of your editors.
I'm so flattered you want to know this.
how, whether it's a piece for airmail, or which seems to be doing great, by the way, or the books. Is there a back and forth or some guidance, or how do you work with your editor on either the smaller form pieces or the big book pieces?
Well, my editor at Scribner is Colin Harrison, and he's just great. And I always fight with him initially, and then I always end up taking his edit. But sometimes it takes me a couple of months.
Yeah.
No, he's great. But I like to get edited a lot, and I like to get, because that you can lose sense of proportion. Like you can be going on too long about something. Mm-hmm. I like all different kinds of people to read my stuff. Like my husband never reads, but he's smart, and I like him to read. Because I think you really need an audience to know if something's working. Yeah. In fact, I think that's part of what the letters were for Eve. Oftentimes, like it's like writing for an audience. So, like if the material is working, like if the other person responds to the letter, because a lot of times you'd see in these letters, some of which she must have sent certain versions of people to, because you can tell in responses she got that she'd sent something that was like the letter that was unsent. Mm-hmm. But I think I think you find out if it's alive and engaging to people by the way they respond.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah, totally. And I have a few people I trust. My editor is terrific. Mine is at Simon & Schuster, Peter Borland.
I bet he's great. Yeah, I've heard great things.
He's great. And if he gives me feedback and I get the same feedback from someone else, then I know, like, this is interesting to you maybe, but not to me.
Yes.
And if two people say that, then I'm like,
consensus.
Okay, I'll deal with it.
Right?
I'll make the change.
No, but it's like, that's actually really important.
Yeah.
No, because it can get too private between you and the book.
Yeah.
Do you have your wife read it?
She's one of my early trusted readers again.
Right.
But and like you, I think you and Eve developed your relationship, and she's actually living. So you actually have an actual relationship.
Oh, yeah.
When my subjects have been dead for a century, and so I have a different kind of relationship with them, but it's still one of, it's a relationship where I can probably go down a rabbit hole a little bit, and it's good to have someone throw in a lifeline once in a while.
Yeah, that's right. You're being really boring, Doug. So I get that too.
Yeah, only you will find this part interesting.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Let's see. I had a couple things here. Oh, the diaries; those were amazing.
Oh, yes.
And I think even as we just said, you had a relationship with a living subject here. You had years of overlap with Eve.
Yeah.
But sometimes she was not reliable. You'd find in the diary, she didn't know whether or not she had slept with Jackson Browne. And then you can check in the diary like, yes, slept with Jackson Browne. It was true.
It's really funny because the only journals that survived was one. It was 69 to 70. And it's like this great time. It's like exactly post-Manson, like it's the fall of 69. It begins. Mm-hmm. But it's like pretty funny because almost every entry ends with, and I did acid. So I think like a lot of stuff went missing, because I don't think she was trying to disguise that she'd had sex with Jackson. I think she genuinely could not remember.
Yeah, in real life. Yeah.
In real life, yeah. I don't think she was being cagey. I remember her, I was like, were you and Jackson ever together? And she's like, I don't think so.
I don't know.
Yeah, like that.
That's amazing. But there were times, I think, one of the things that comes across well in your book is you're such a good guide for the reader because you know all the characters in the book.
Yeah.
And you can detect, you're a credible guy because you can kind of detect even their subterfuge.
Yes, it's true.
She might be trying to say this, but you have 9 points of cross-referencing where you say, she's trying to spin it here, and it's not that, it's the other.
Well, that's what I mean when I'm saying, like, there's no substitute for time. I will always cop to my own incompetence, and I wish I were quicker. But at some level, you can't be because it takes so much time to know people. Mm-hmm. And another thing that these letters did, people's stories harden. You know that thing of like a twice told tale, when somebody's told a story too much, it's like their memory's grooved and they're going to remember something one way. And then you'd like confront, like this was really helpful with Dan Wakefield. You'd confront Dan Wakefield with the letter and all of a sudden it's like these fresh, untouched memories kind of flood their brain and they get angry again about stuff. It was Dan, it wasn't Dan getting angry at Eve, it was Dan getting angry at Joan, and it was revealing and great.
That's interesting. Everyone has a natural defense mechanism to sort of bury it down, shape it a little bit in a way that's a little bit easier to digest.
Yeah.
And then but the facts can penetrate that even after all these years.
Yeah, they can. And it's like you also want to have soft feelings toward your friends. I think that's just a natural thing. But you get pissed at people, anybody you're close with. And I think he had felt that Joan had, he was living in LA in 1971. That's when he was with Evie. And, you know, it's like, it's also like, it's a wild thing, like, to do what we do because we go back. But Dan Wakefield was a really important writer in 1971. You know, like, a whole issue of The Atlantic was devoted to his, like, ruminations on Vietnam. And he's one of those guys whose reputation didn't last, not deservedly. It's just, it's the way things go. Things go in and out of fashion. That was one reminder. But he was explaining to me that when he was living out there, and he and Joan had been friends since the 50s. He was close with Noel Parmentel as well. Anyway, he was saying when he came to Los Angeles, Joan didn't introduce him to a single person because she kind of wanted to keep this Franklin Avenue scene to herself. She knew it was good material. And so I never would have gotten that out of him if I wasn't prodding him with these letters or things that Noel Parmentel had said. It's just like, you have to, it's not like you want to torture people, but sometimes you have to kind of goose them or they're going to tell you the same old story.
You know, speaking of saying good material, Joan Didion was unsparing and brutal in taking figures from her life, basically just putting a different name on them, and telling the story. I mean, she was writing sort of nonfiction fiction, which I didn't realize about all that. I don't know if it was a Book of Common Prayer or which one of her books, but basically her husband's a character. Her prior lover, who she really kind of loves more than her husband, is a character.
Book of Common Prayer.
It was, okay, yeah. So her husband then reads this book, and it's for anyone who knows her, it's transparent who everyone is.
Everybody knew.
So he says, I'm the husband guy who she doesn't love.
I know.
He's the affair guy who she does love.
Still loves, yeah.
It's insane. And so they all have to read this stuff and be like, my God. And then it becomes a super famous book that everyone reads, but they're all characters in the book.
I know, and it's funny because, you know, Noel was like thrilling to me. You know, he'd been the big lover in Joan's life in the 50s, and he was the great mentor figure. And he was like, I think it was the writer David Thompson said to me that when you read Joan's books, you can feel this longing for kind of a Hemingway-esque figure, like a kind of a macho kind of older man who will take care of her, the Joan character. And you knew, if you knew the couple, that figure wasn't John, and it was Noel. I can't even imagine the weirdness and pain of that.
Yeah.
But I guess it's being married to a writer, you know.
I get, and it seems like their marriage was somewhat of a partnership.
Yeah.
I mean, it love on some level, but they sort of managed to. It wasn't the love story I would have thought of that I would like, but there were a couple.
It worked for them, but it was a wild. I always think of that Diane Arbus quote where she says, "All families are creepy in a way," you know, and it's true about marriages. I mean, I'm in one; they are all kind of creepy in a way. But when you get into the nitty gritty of hers, it's eye popping, you know.
Yeah. Everyone's got their things. They're picadillos.
That's right.
One of the scenes in there about Jim Morrison I found so interesting, and it timed out exactly with my wife and I showing our kids the movie Almost Famous. So Jim Morrison is just kind of a boob. Like, we all think of him as like the lead singer of The Doors, and the movie comes out and he's awesome. And, you know, if you're a
great looking.
Yeah. And if you're a guy or a girl in like the 80s, like he was this revered rock star. But behind the scenes, he was just a total doofus. And I remember this scene in Almost Famous.
Yeah.
You know, the Cameron Crowe movie.
Of course.
And so our kids are watching it, and the Philip Seymour Hoffman character, who's sort of like the muse for the young Cameron Crowe character, he's like, Jim Morrison, he's just a drunk fool pretending to be a poet. You know, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just read that in Lily's book. Like, it's basically what he was.
And Eve would know, but yet she found him moving. I mean,
it didn't stop her from sleeping with him.
No, he looked great. Though she says she could not remember the sex because they were always both so drunk. But she finds him moving too. I mean, I remember her, like, he gets under her skin in a certain way, and she thought she seduced him when he was 22. She was 23, and it was before the Doors had settled on the name. And she thought it was so corny to name yourself after an Aldous Huxley book. She thought this was so, like, just like he was like uncool. But then after he died, she just talked about he started to seem great compared to everything else, you know. So there was something about him she really liked. But she did not think he was cool.
Yeah. Well, that just reminded me, off mic later, there's a scene in there, unless you changed it from the advanced copy, which I read to the hardcover. You said there's some new stuff in the hardcover from the advanced.
No, I wouldn't have taken anything salacious out. So
did you add something salacious? Because there's one scene you didn't, like there was a bathroom scene with a huge A-lister who was doing a really aggressive sexual act in the bathroom.
Oh my God, yes, of course. Yeah.
Did you reveal the name in the hardcover?
No, I never revealed the name. So this is off mic?
Now we're on mic.
Oh, now
Off
we're on
mic
mic.
later. I'll
tell you later.
Okay.
But it was a woman. It was the first book on Eve, Hollywood's Eve, and it was off record. I didn't use the person's name in it, and it was somebody. What had this person done? It was fist fucking. It was something. It was something aggressive.
That's about the limit of what we'll say on the show.
Yeah, no. Of course. I even feel bad saying it. You seem like a wholesome person, Doug. But I don't want to upset you. But somebody,
as I go for the gin.
As you go for the gin. But I was like on a wholesome family trip in the Berkshires. This was right around like just when COVID was starting to lift, and my sons were so little, like still like in preschool and first grade, and we're in the Berkshires, being wholesome. And I get this email, and it's from a person who says, "Dear Lily, you talk about a fist fucker in your book. You don't identify the person. Was this person's initials?" Then she says what the initials are. Mm-hmm. And she says, "I was in a bathroom stall at Max's Kansas City. I was married to the guy who ran Max's Kansas City. And an actor goes in there and he's doing this to some girl. So tell me it was like a wild email."
She had the right initials, so she knows.
No, she didn't have the right initials.
Oh.
It was I think actually I could say it now. It was Fiorucci. It was not an actor, but her person was a famous actor.
That's the real person.
No, the real person in my book was Fiorucci, who's
Okay.
now dead.
Yeah.
He was asking Eve to do this, and Eve, that was past Eve's limit. She refused. That's what he wanted from her, and she thought it was ridiculous, wouldn't do it. But this woman was asking me. She knew a famous actor who had done this in a bathroom stall at Max's Kansas City, and was asking me if that's who it was, but it was not.
It was not. Okay.
It was not.
So that. Did she only give you the initials, or you know who it is?
She gave me the initials, and it was obvious. That's why I didn't put them in, because it was obvious from the initials.
Who it is.
I'll tell you after the show.
Okay, good. I'm dying to know all this. I don't know why I care about this, but I
why
really
should
want to
you
know.
care? But yeah, I know. Yeah, you want to know. I will totally gratify your sleazy curiosity.
Right. Thank you. One of the things that I found interesting in the book, and as you know, Jay McInerney and I talked about this a little bit
fun.
too, in terms of defining the decades.
Yeah.
And one of the cool things about Didion and Babitz in the 60s and 70s, that was the it crowd. This was before Hollywood. They made fun of the Hollywood people. All those nerds need to be up early on the set. They don't party. They don't do drugs. The cool people were the rock stars like Jim Morrison and the Eagles.
Yeah.
And the literary crowd.
Yeah.
That was the it crowd.
And they were
Hollywood
cool.
was the nerds.
Yeah.
And then by the 80s, Hollywood was cool and literary was sort of still coolish but drifting down a little bit.
Even in the 70s, I feel like that did shift. Like New Hollywood was coming in, right? Like And Dennis Hopper was one of those guys who
crossed over a little.
Yeah, crossed over.
He showed up hungover to the set.
Always. Yeah, he didn't mind.
How do you think about it now? I know there's a bit of a lightning round question on this for later, but
you gave me the cheat sheet and I forgot to cheat. Ask me now.
Well, it's just like, do you think, what was the last decade that you think you could mark?
Oh, who was?
Because as Jay and I were talking, and you were saying,
Yeah.
it happens retroactively. Like, you don't know you're in the 60s until like 1972. Like, that was the 60s. We can kind of figure it out now.
He was talking about that with the 80s. Well, the reason I know Jay is because I interviewed him for this Bennington College. It was an Esquire piece, and then it was a podcast. And that's really a 90s, like Brett, Jay, Donna, Jonathan, they're really 80s and 90s people.
Is it Lethem or Lethem?
I say Lethem.
Lethem, okay.
I think I'm saying it right, but I get shit wrong all the time. I don't know. Maybe I'm not. Like, I know him. I should be getting it right. But there's something about these eras that was secretive. Okay, I'm working on something on Paula Fox and Courtney Love right now. Mm-hmm. Okay, you remember Courtney Love, right?
I do. Yeah. The other one. Who's the other one though?
So Paula Fox. So Courtney Love's mother, who kicked her out when she was extremely young, like 9 or 10. Was adopted, and when Courtney had Frances Bean with Kurt Cobain, the mother hired a private detective, and it turned out that her biological mother was the novelist Paula Fox, who really had a vogue in the early 2000s. Speaking of Jonathan Lethem, it was Jonathan Lethem and Franzen, and all these people got her back into print. And she's kind of a writer's writer, kind of high up, like that kind of thing, like lofty. Anyway, at any rate, they turn out to be grandmother and grandchild. And Courtney had written me something when I did the Bennington 86 podcast. She kind of DM'd me and wanted me to find out if her grandfather was Marlon Brando. I'll explain all this off record. You don't need to hear all this. Where I'm going with this is I notice when Courtney will talk, she was kind of a gutter snipe, right? She's like in her early teens, mid-teens, early 20s, and she doesn't really have cash. And she goes to all these different cities, and she always gets to the center of what's hot. Like she would always find the underground. And I remember asking her, like, how did you do it? And she said that she could figure out what the cool record store was, and there'd be like a cute clerk or whatever. And she'd go up to that guy, and she'd always ask if they carried Exile on Main Street, not by the Rolling Stones, but by Pussy Galore. It was like this bootleg. And then that was like, that gave her entree into the secret society. Do you know?
She's in the know. She's cool.
Yeah, exactly. But like, there used to be
And then they would help her get backstage. She's like Penny Lane from Almost Famous.
Yeah, exactly. And she could always
Only
do
more
it.
drugs, maybe.
Yeah, I'm sure. But what I liked about that was like, you know, the world used to have these little secret enclaves, you know, and you really had to get in to know, right? And like, that doesn't feel, everything feels so much more online and antiseptic now. So I feel like those scenes, and I remember Michelle Phillips saying this to me, because she was so famous in the 60s and 70s. It was the Mamas and the Papas, and she always had these like great looking famous boyfriends, and then she became an actress. You know, it would be Warren Beatty and Jack Nicholson, and just, you know, she was always kind of maneuvering, and she was so pretty. And I remember her telling me that it was so great because nobody had a camera, right? So you could go do anything. It was a small little world in LA, and you could just go do whatever, right? And now I remember like doing a cover story on Kristen Stewart, and this would have been in like 2014, and her explaining to me that she basically lived her whole social life at her house, you know, because people have those flip phones. You have no privacy, right?
That's so funny you say that. So as evidence, I'm going to show you that my next question that I wanted to ask was, how would Eve have made it in the era where everyone has a video camera in their pocket?
I don't know.
Like, could she have done it? It's just, she would, or done it the same way, or maybe she'd be
bigger,
a billionaire like Kardashian or something.
Well, it's like I think she still would have been herself. Like, I think she still would have been private, because I think Eve, like, the dirtiest word in Eve's vocabulary was professionalism or career. She thought those were antithetical to art, and she was an artist down to her toes. So I suspect she would never have figured out how to monetize it. Yeah. You know? Like,
her sex and partying wasn't performative. That's just what she wanted to go do.
No, I remember there was this thing. I remember she had this long-term boyfriend, Paul Rocher, who was mostly gay but not all the way gay, and he would tell me that sometimes she'd be at a party and she just would be like, let's go fuck, you know. And he said that they were in the bathroom and the door kind of swung open and people were watching, and he was happy to have an audience, and she slammed the door. You know, she just wanted to have the good time. She actually wasn't really performing for the crowd in that way. Yeah. So she liked the privacy.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I'm sure she would have adapted. If there's anything she can do, it would be
maybe
adapting.
She had an OnlyFans account. Who knows?
Yeah. So before we get into the lightning round, what is next? You mentioned something about Courtney Love. Is that the next book?
That's what
Now, is that the book that you were under contract for before you started this?
No, the next book will be Bennington 86. That is what I'm under contract to do, and I will do it. I love those three. Sometimes I need to get my appetite back. You know, it was like a 12 episode podcast. It was super in depth. So I need to be refreshed on that. But I'm working on a podcast on Paula Fox and Courtney Love. That is what I'm working on right now. Okay. But I don't know if it's possible to do, but I'm trying.
But that'll come out at least initially in podcast form and may or may not be a book?
I wouldn't do it as a book. I mean, I think the subject matter dictates the medium, you know, and Courtney's such a great talker.
Yeah. So she's going to come on the podcast. We'll be hearing from her directly.
You'll be hearing from Courtney directly. And she's just so dynamic.
Yeah. How old is she now, roughly?
Just turned 60.
Okay. I haven't seen her. I know. I guess this will be her resurrection again. This is your thing.
We'll see. But she turned Brett. So she
healthy? Ish?
I think so. I mean, she's certainly a lot of vitality, like very dynamic. Yeah. But the reason she got in contact really was she felt that she was telling me she was supposed to be in that Bennington class of 86, and the years match up. So Brett's 1964, Letham's 64, Donna's tail end of 63, and Courtney is July of 64. So they're all like Vanguard Gen X. Yeah. You're mid Gen X, 1971.
Yeah. Oh, you've done your homework.
Yeah. But you're mid. That makes you, you're in the meaty center of Generation X.
Yeah. So do they know Courtney Love, those three?
Yeah.
They know her from those days, or just they know of her?
She never got to Bennington. She
never went at all?
No.
Yeah, not even. Okay.
No, she finished juvie, and she said she was going to go to Bennington, but like her dad told her he was a professor at Trinity College in Dublin, but he was really a drug dealer there, something like that. A lot of drug dealers in my stories for whatever reason.
Oh, wow.
But Brett knows her a bit, and I think Lethem, she was dating Ed Norton for a couple of years, and then Ed did Motherless Brooklyn, and
Edward Norton was in that, yeah.
Yeah, so somehow they all kind of know each other.
Which was not really true to the book, I have to say. The big departures on that movie. But that was a great book.
It was a great book. And he's a really nice guy.
Worked at a bookstore or something, right? And when he was a
Yes,
kid? Yeah.
like secondhand. And I think did it like well into his 30s. Like he was a real, is it a bibliophile? I don't know, a real book person.
Yeah.
Whatever the fancy term is for book person, that is Jonathan.
Well, I'm psyched for the podcast with Courtney Love. What's
That's so nice to
have you started production on that or?
No, well, I'm doing the research, but it's going to be called Bastard Hollywood. And that's all I really have so far. I mean, it's like the research is like intense. So
is
I'm
it going to be
that.
deep into the Kurt Cobain days as well, or is more before that?
No, Kurt, of course, how could Kurt not be in it? But it's really funny, you know, because so I'm born in 1978 and he died when I was 15, you know, a sophomore. And I really wasn't paying attention. I probably was paying more attention to Courtney just because she was a girl and pretty wild. But now it's like if I'm in a grocery store and like Lithium comes on or Come As You Are, I wasn't even paying attention, but it's like I'm back in 1993, 1994. Somehow he just evokes the era. And it's wild at my kid's school. 1 in every 5 T-shirts is a Nirvana T-shirt.
That is amazing.
It is amazing. It's amazing what sticks and what stays and what falls away.
Yeah, I mean, they were really like the biggest of that whole grunge movement.
Yes.
I mean, there are some bands had a little more staying power. But so he died in 94?
It was 94.
Yeah, wow.
But I think a lot changes in that year. I think it all ends in that year. Well, that's the year I would probably put where everything breaks down. I mean, so I'm friends with this guy named Josh Klinghoffer, and Josh has an odd career. So I'm born in 1978. He's born in 1979. We're like tail end Gen X. Mm-hmm. And he believes we're our own little subset. He calls it latex, like late Generation X. He's obsessed with this. So Josh was in the Chili Peppers for 10 years, and he was the replacement for John Frusciante. And now he's touring right now. Like he's in New Zealand, I think. Is Auckland in New Zealand?
Yeah, oh my God, it's going to be embarrassing, but yes, I think so.
Yeah, that's what he was. He was there. We were Zooming last night. So he's in Auckland. So he's in New Zealand, and he's with Pearl Jam. So he lives in this crazy Gen X vortex, right? Like all the bands that were big when we were young. So we talk about this stuff all the time and thinking about Courtney and even about Brett and Donna, you know. But like I miss those that underground that we were talking about before, where things could kind of flower in secret and then come up and change the world. Like grunge, these dirty kind of white underclass kids from the Pacific Northwest end up just completely changing. They hijack the culture, right? And things could work themselves out and develop in private. And now it just feels like that doesn't happen. Like things get yanked up too soon.
So 94, Cobain dies, grunge maybe is on the downward trend, email and many of the other things that we mentioned are in the upswing. And I remember. So I was a 93 grad from college.
That sounds right.
And I had a word processor, but it sort of worked like a printer. You know, you put the thing in and everything was in this
basically like a typewriter
DOS format, and you could only see about 4 lines of text.
Yes.
It was basically a typewriter with an auto printer. You know, that was all it was, really. It could retain a little bit of information of text.
But not much.
Not much, yeah. So I didn't have a computer. And then, but that was 93. Fast forward even, 4 or 5 years, it's completely different.
Well, everything changes. So I graduate in 96, and I handed, 96 is high school though, but even in college, I remember handing some papers in handwritten. Do you know what? Like,
oh my God, that's right. Oh, you could pay someone to type your papers if you had to.
You could, for sure.
I remain a terrible typist to this day, just because I hand wrote everything.
We didn't need it. Like it was a skill we didn't quite need. But then my brother is 81, and I remember he went to Amherst, and I visited him his senior year, and everybody was on a phone. Like that was completely non-existent when I graduated in 2000. It's just amazing how accelerated all that stuff became.
So the podcast with Courtney is going to capture some of that transition years. Oh, I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's exciting. Like I feel like if you're ex, you're going to care.
Now you can do it on video too, or audio only?
I think I prefer audio. I do think that people are different. Like
I should be more relaxed. Maybe.
Yeah, it's more relaxed, and I am too.
But serve us some cocktails. I'll come. I'll make the cocktails.
I'm really fucked up on this. Okay? I'm seeing double. I'm really trying to maintain. I feel like my liver's in terrible shape because even though I don't drink, I take NyQuil every night so I can sleep for a few hours. But I don't drink,
NyQuil every night?
Every night.
Just to knock you out?
I gotta.
All right. Well, I mean, you should consider gin.
Yeah, maybe.
Might be healthier. All right. Well, before any of us passes out, we'll get on to the lightning round then. Your favorite book as a kid?
Okay, it was a book called Straight Life. I stole it from my father. It was the autobiography of Art Pepper. I read it when I was 9. It had everything about drug and sex you could want.
Who is Art Pepper?
He was a white junkie jazz musician in the 40s and 50s. But crazily enough, he wrote it with his wife at the time, and that was Eve's cousin. And that's really how I got in with Eve.
No way.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes. It's a great book.
So the whole Eve story started for you when you were 10 with that book.
Nine. I kept it under my bed. I didn't want my mom to know. Though it's really funny.
Amazing.
I actually still have the copy. You can see an orange crayon. I've circled the sex passages. It's really sad.
When you start thinking about the nature-nurture thing,
I know.
there must be something in the nature of this Babitz family.
That's right.
It's, nurture too, but there's
some
something
sweet
in the
spot.
genes.
Yeah, it's some sweet spot.
All right, book or books you're reading now?
Okay. Well, I'm reading a ton of Paula Fox for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I read kind of a Highsmithy thriller by a guy named Chris Bonnell. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but it was really good. And I'm reading a biography of Kurt Cobain. So that's what I'm reading right now. Doing a lot of work. Exactly.
But you love your work. The books are good.
Work.
Who wrote the biography of Cobain? Do you know offhand?
Yeah, Charles Cross, who I interviewed. Actually, we had a phone conversation, and then he died a week later. He got a heart attack. He was like a young guy. It was weird. I am now the Grim Reaper. So Vanity Fair is excerpting one of the chapters in Didion and Babitz. They wanted to fact check. I mean, the book had whatever. It had already kind of gone through that. But every time they asked me for someone, that person had died the week before. Noel Parmental died in late August. Dan Wakefield died in the spring.
Yeah.
Bob Weiner, everybody.
It's fascinating who we still read after the decades.
It's amazing, right?
A number of these names were huge in their time that I have never read or even heard of. So I was looking them up and then I saw one of them die just, probably in the time you were working on the book.
Yes. It's scary.
What do you think it is? Just as a quick tangent question, what is it that, we read Hemingway after all these years, or Fitzgerald, or
I have an answer.
Even Orwell. And why do some people, you always hear, it's like a movie line, oh, nobody reads so-and-so anymore. They're not important. Why is that?
I hate when they say that, first of all. They act like that's some final judgment on the writer's work, when really it's just a reflection of the time we live in. So I hate that. It drives me fucking nuts. But I think that the people that stick around, and this is why Joan for sure has a chance, and even Eve has a chance. I think if they embody, like with Hemingway and Fitzgerald, for example, whom we still read, they seem like characters in their own books, and they live huge lives, like big lives, and they seem to embody the excesses of their eras. Mm-hmm. There's something about those kind of writers. They stick around. It's like the persona and the characters in the books, they all match up. I think it helps.
So McInerney has a chance.
McInerney for sure has a chance, as does Brett.
Yeah.
Yeah. So better get a cocaine habit.
Yeah, I've got to, wholesome. That could work. I'll write a wholesome character from the 2000s aughts or something.
I'm just teasing, but it is a wild thing. Why does some just disappear?
Yeah. Yeah, I've wondered that. Guys that used to be on Johnny Carson.
I know.
Saul, nobody, and I think that there might be a movie line nobody reads Saul Bellow anymore.
They don't. But he's huge. He's really good.
Yeah, it's interesting. It helps to get on the the high school English curriculum. Then you've got sort of a built-in. It's like Goodnight Moon. Every year, a certain amount of people have to buy you.
For sure. No, for sure. And it's actually that's a great point.
All right, next question. Weirdest question that you've ever gotten at a book event?
I mean, somebody once asked me what I thought of my mother. I thought that was crazy. I don't write about my mother.
You don't even write about you, really. I mean,
they wanted to know.
Are some of your pieces on Vanity Fair or something?
No, I don't.
Biographical?
No, I mean, I mean, I'm kind of in there a little bit, but not much. But that was weird to me.
So how did you handle that one?
I said, she's the best and, the worst, like all mothers.
Good answer.
Right, though?
Was she satisfied? She let it go at that?
She laughed, I guess.
All right, well, that's good. Well handled. Who would play Eve Babitz in the movie version?
Oh, actresses are so thin. I think
Eve was not sort of waify thin. Is that what you mean?
That's what I mean.
Not a thin bench of good actresses, so physically thin.
Yeah, physically. Oh yeah, no. Yeah, that's what I meant. Actually, body type. She was really curvy. Did you ever watch that show, Killing Eve?
Yes, I love that show.
I thought that first season.
She's
perfect.
Great, that actress. I can't think of her name offhand, but she was great.
Jodie Comer.
Yes.
I just thought of it, thank God.
She was great. Season 1 of Killing Eve was awesome.
We loved it. And she has that kind of she's got that charm of an amoral child.
Mm-hmm. She almost has a detached look on her eyes, like she's looking at you, but she's thinking something else. Or
she might eat you, she might have sex with you, she might kill you, and that's the Eve vibe.
Yeah, well, that's great. I like that actress. She's terrific.
Yeah, it'd be great to get her.
All right. Along the same lines, favorite few recent TV shows to recommend to the audience?
I watched, did you hear of a show called Tell Me Lies?
Tell Me Lies.
It's smart. Like, it's a very, like, horny, smart show. So there you go.
Who's in that? That's not the one with Nicole Kidman and Leah Schreiber.
Definitely not. No, that's not it's not like classy like that, but it's like really good. It's Katie Sagal from Married with Children's son is the male lead, and it's a pretty. It's
is
like
this
pretty
just
kids.
out?
It's in its second season. It's on Hulu. It's good.
All right, I'm in.
I'm telling you, Tell Me Lies. It was pretty great, and I loved it. I'm a year late to this, but there was like a I don't know what you call it, like a limited series, but documentary on Warhol in the 70s and 80s. It was heaven, because you always hear about Warhol in the 60s and Edie, but this was about when he was kind of famous, but people thought he was tacky or whatever. It was great. I loved it.
Oh, I'll check that out. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's like great on New York. It's really the 80s, and New York in the 80s I feel is it's like underexplored. It's great.
Well, that's great. New York is such a great character as a part of all this stuff.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, you did the same thing with L.A. Like, you brought L.A. right
nice of you to
off
say.
the page as a character in the book, which I loved. Because I'm much more familiar with New York, so I felt like I got to know a side of L.A. through your book.
Is that why you like Jay's really good on New York?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing. Same thing there. And I was thinking, it was so great to have read your book right before I interviewed Jay, because I just felt there were all these parallels.
He was on Brett's podcast, and Graydon threw me a party, not the one that you went to, which was actually.
Oh, you don't tell me you sent me to the Gen Pop party. You had a nice private party with Graydon?
No. It was like when I did the first book on Eve, he threw me a party. This one was
years
better.
ago.
Yeah, years ago. This one was better, but it got covered somehow by the tabloids, and they were making fun of it. Like, they were like, people think this is a good literary party. Pff, in the 80s, and I was so flattered to be trashed by those two.
It does seem, it's your party with Graydon Carter. Can I out the location?
Oh, yeah.
So it was at the Waverly Inn, which I think Graydon might own some of.
He does. Totally.
And it was great. There were hundreds, way more. We approached it, and it was spilling into the sidewalk. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I can elbow my way into this thing.
I'm so glad you did.
We did. It was hot. But the drinks were great, and the crowd was great, and it was super fun. But it's very rare to have, Airmail is really
they're so good.
in love with you and being good to you, because it's rare that writers, even successful writers, have book parties. It just
never
almost
happens.
doesn't happen. Nelson DeMille is a good friend, and he came out with his debut in 1978. So through the 80s,
my year.
He was a huge your birth year was his first book.
Yeah.
And
did he just die?
He did. Yeah.
I think my agent was his agent.
That might be.
She was upset.
And he was at SNS too. Scribner at the end, I think, too. So, but they used to have book parties and dinners and martini lunches and all the stuff, and that's kind of gone away.
Do you know who was at Jay's Bright Lights Big City party? This is like New York of a certain era. So it was held at Area. Did you ever hear of this club?
No. This would have been 85-ish?
84. And it's like thrilling. So I live in Tribeca, and I interviewed this woman named Pigeon O'Brien when I was doing the Bennington podcast, and she said to me, "You live in Tribeca?" She's like, "We used to go to clubs there." And she's like, "You could buy Coke in Tribeca, but you couldn't buy a Coke." Like, it was just like, I love that distinction. But it turned out that we live on, I guess I can't say my address, but we live in Tribeca, and then the street, like this, it's not even a block. Like, it's like 10 feet away, where my dog will always poo. Was where Area was, and it was this incredible club that Eric Goode had, and all the artists, they would change it every week, and an artist would do the interior. So Jay's Bright Lights Big City party is there, and Sting comes, Norman Mailer comes, and Boy George. Can you imagine? That was just that's how it was.
By the way, anyone under 20 years old right now is like, who are they? Why was that a deal?
Oh, it was a deal, man. It was a deal. But can you imagine?
Yeah, that's amazing.
I can't imagine who the equivalents are now, but big people, big
and now,
pop stars.
there really aren't book parties. It almost doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen. But Graydon's still that kind of mid-century showman type guy that's just dying out, but they know how to throw a party.
Well, he's a cool character, and he's definitely got his finger on the pulse of things.
The best.
He still sort of knows what works.
He does.
Which is good. He's got a gift that way, as great editors do.
He's great.
Yeah.
A stylish person. Yes.
Along the same lines as to what we're talking about here, the next question, the it crowd, as defined in your book here in the 60s and 70s, was the writers and the rock stars. It then moved to Hollywood and professional athletes, I think, to some extent. So who is the it crowd today, And who will be the next it crowd looking out a decade or two?
I have no ability to prognosticate. I only look back. I always think I'm moonwalking into the future. I'm moving forward, but looking back, I have no idea. But I feel like it would be like, I was at the Chateau Marmont in the spring, and somebody was whispering to me. I was at a table. I don't know Andre Balazs, if I'm even saying the name right, but I was at his table because I was meeting like Brett and Bruce Wagner, 2 writers, for dinner, and Bruce was with Andre, and like in the hotel.
Who is Andre? I'm not.
He runs the Chateau Marmont.
Okay, he runs. All right. Yeah.
He runs it, and it was like Kanye West was there, and Lady Gaga was there, and John Waters was there in this tiny private hotel, and like 2 famous YouTubers. So I guess scenes still exist, but I wouldn't know what they are. But I felt like that seemed like it seemed like a confluence of people that was kind of exciting.
Yeah. So are we still in the Hollywood athlete, little bit of rock star phase of famous? I mean, Taylor Swift is near the top, so rock stars are still in there.
Do you have boys or girls?
2 boys, 1 girl.
So I only have 2 boys, and all they're into is athletes and rappers. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
I guess that's it.
I guess that's it. Then I feel like young people don't know anything. I don't know why we pay attention to them. So I don't know. I should not take cues from my kids.
All right. Well, last question for Lili Anolik. Yeah. One piece of advice for the audience.
One piece of advice. Like, do they want to be writers? Is that the idea?
Yeah. I mean, take it any way you want it, I guess. Yeah.
Have a full stomach when you come see Doug, because you might get drunk. I don't know. If you want to be a writer, just be relentless. That's it. That's my only advice.
I think that's very true. You got to read. You got to write.
All of it. Be obsessed.
Yeah.
I think that's true for anything.
Yeah. Lili, thank you so much.
Thank you for having
fun.
me. So fun, Doug. This is great.